is Meharry Medical School?
Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville. How did you get from Nashville to San Mateo?
Well, my wife was a native of San Jose, and her parents were eager to have her come back to San Jose. She decided against it. So she didn't want to go home again, and I didn't want to go there either. And so we decided to come to San Mateo because I had a cousin in San Mateo, and I visited my cousin, and she said, "Why don't you come to San Mateo?" And she convinced me, and we did come. And we met a Dr. Norton Benner. I don't know whether you knew Dr. Benner, and he greeted me warmly and took me up to his house in Hillsborough and served cocktails and food, and we bonded together. And he said, "By the way, you can use my office in the afternoons, in the evenings when I'm off, until you find an office." But I didn't know that he knew that I was going to be unable to rent an office in San Mateo. So therefore I used his office for a time because I was unable to rent an office because of my race. And, therefore I was going to leave San Mateo, but Mr. Kehoe, who was the first Democratic postmaster of San Mateo, was over the AMVET group. That's a group of veterans, and they wanted me to be the doctor. And so he called my apartment where we lived, and my wife answered the phone, and he said, "I would like to speak to the doctor." So she said, "Well, I don't know how long he's going to be here because we can't find an office." And he said, "Well, why?" She said, "Because of our race." And he says, "Well, where did he look?" And the Kehoes owned quite a bit of property in San Mateo. And so he said, "Where did he look?" And she told him on B Street, and he said, "What building?" And she told him, he said, "Well, I own that property. No one ever told me that someone wanted to rent that building." And he said, "Well, by the way, I have a property on San Mateo Drive in Tilton, and I'll sell that building to him, and he can have that as an office." So my wife said, what will we use for money?" He said, "Don't worry about that." And that's how I got that property on San Mateo Drive.
And you're still there?
Yeah.
And so, wow.
Because he knew that he had property all over San Mateo. We looked at several pieces of his property, and the real estate people would say, "Well, the owner's on a cruise." I said, "Well, why can't you wire him and ask him can we rent it?" And they told me all sorts of stories. So Kehoe knew that we had, was facing prejudice. Because he was faced prejudice because he was a Democratic postmaster in a Republican stronghold in San Mateo. So he knew what prejudice was. So that's why we came to San Mateo, and that's where we stayed. And the building, I think he charged us only $20,000 for that building in San Mateo. So that's why
So you're in.
yeah.
So you had your not only a location, but you owned it.
That's right, and then we lived upstairs.
Oh, okay.
So we lived upstairs for 7 years before we bought our home in San Mateo and Hillsborough.
And how hard was it to buy a home in Hillsborough?
Well, we couldn't get a real estate man to show us that street. So my wife would always call and say that she was Mrs. Reed because she didn't have an accent, and she would use her sister's name, and she would get the listings that way. And she would go, and she and my aunt would go around and look. So anyway, one time she kept calling and said she wanted to know the listings of Hillsborough property. And so the real estate agent said, "Mrs. Reed, why do you want to live in Hillsborough? That's the Jewish Alps." So you see, they cut with both sides of the machete. They didn't want Jews or Negroes.
I wouldn't fit in then. I still don't. Okay, and so that was in what year?
That was in 1952.
52.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, and what were the 50s like in San Mateo?
Well, they were very peaceful, very rural-like, just almost like a country town. I remember my father came to visit us. We lived above the office at that time, and my father always loved to dress well, and my wife and I was outside watering the lawn there at 72 North San Mateo Drive, and he came down with a cigar and his hat in a rakish angle and said, I said, well, Dad, where are you going? He said, I'm going uptown. And I said, where are you going uptown? I'm going uptown to get a shoe shine. I said, Dad, you can't get a shoe shine in San Mateo. And my father looked at me. He said, son, are you going to live and die in a town where you can't get a shoe shine? Sometimes when I'm walking, I do a lot of walking, I think of my father. And I think he said that. I said to myself, yes, Dad, I'm going to live and die in a town where I can't get a shoe shine. But that, he couldn't imagine that a town where you can't get a shoe shine. That shows you what his priorities were.
And the 60s, anything about the 60s?
Well, no.
No, 60s.
The 60s.
How about famous people or someone who have you met through your years?
I can't think.
Oh, Jim, who was the Jewish gentleman you mentioned?
Well, from the Mendelssohns to, he delivered Lynn Swann, the football player, who was, MVP of the Super Bowl and whatever, for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And Lee Mendelsohn, if you don't know,
He's the producer of the Snoopy, where Schultz does the cartoons, Mendelssohn does the movies, and
those were all done out of San Mateo. Lee
San
Mendelsohn.
Mateo, right? Absolutely.
And there's a house down in
John Hain Road, right?
Yes, go ahead.
And you see a white Steinway piano with the Snoopy.
In the window.
With the Snoopy on it.
top.
Yeah, that's his house, right?
No, really?
Yeah.
So Dr. Hutchinson, in your practice, when did you actually feel that you were being respected as a black doctor?
Last week? I'm just joking.
So during your practice, when did you actually feel like, okay, now folks are actually coming to a black doctor and trusting me?
I think from the beginning.
From the beginning?
At Mills Hospital, I was on emergency. I served emergency service. And I didn't know this, that when a patient would come, they would say, we have a doctor on call, but he's black, or he's Negro, or he's Afro-American. But I didn't know this all those months and all those years until one time I had a patient, Peter Ratto. He was an Italian, and he was very wild. And they told him, and he started screaming there. And Mills Hospital was like a village hospital here in El Camino. Get him, I don't care whether he's green. So they stopped that, and then they called me in one day and said, Dr. Hutchinson, we only did that to protect you. And I said, protect me from what? He said, well, he was too shy to tell me, I guess you're president. But I always felt, but I felt it was an advantage because everybody, the others were white and they were serving emergency, and no one remembered them, but they remembered me. So some of those patients now, that's been 50, 60 some years ago, their children come to me now. Those old people, they still come to me. So it was an advantage, because after all I was remembered.
Right.
They were indelible, the others were, but I wasn't.
Also, when you were the doctor for the rodeo, Jim, come on, let's go to the rodeo. And they would bring these cowboys that had bones sticking out. And I went, wow, I'm going to go wait in the car. So, I don't know how long you were the doctor there for, but that was gruesome. That was worse than the emergency room, I thought.
On the injuries, you mean,
The injuries to the, right. I
needed
mean,
orthopedic guy for that.
yeah, they needed someone,
Tell us more about the rodeo.
get,
Well, the rodeo, That was a job that I didn't particularly care for.
Right, absolutely.
There was such grit and dust and,
Yeah, how did you get railroaded into doing that?
well, that was, well, I needed the money.
Okay.
And they had a list of assignments. I didn't pay much attention to that. The kids enjoyed it more than I did.
Another question, when did Planned Parenthood, you were involved with that and Project 90 or something, when did
Yeah,
that?
Project 90, you probably know what Project 90 is.
No, I don't think we do.
That's the,
I know.
it's an organization for recovering alcoholics and help them recover. And at that time, I had a patient who lived in Shoreview, and he was a recovering alcoholic, and he had a son who was an alcoholic, and while he would go to work, the son would bring other alcoholics into their home, and they would drink, and the father was working every day. So he told me that he was coming, it shattered his nerves that his son was an alcoholic too, and the father was recovering, and he said that I just can't go on anymore, and I don't want to throw my son out on the road to the streets. So anyway, at the same time, the state of California declared alcoholism to be a disability, and they would pay you for disability, money for being disabled. So he asked me to, why don't you put my son on disability and these others on disability that come there to drink with him, and that will give me the check and I can pay my bills with that. So anyway, I said, well, certainly it was legal because they were disabled, they were alcoholics. So anyway, then he talked to another fellow, and he got the idea that they would form an organization called Project 90 to use these checks to fund this organization, and that's how Project 90 began. And I was a doctor, I guess, for several years, and then when they became funded, they got another fellow, another doctor. So I figured that was just some dice thrown my way.
And Project 90, I see the sign down in San Mateo on the building they're in.
Yeah, that's
I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and now they've taken over a place on 2nd Avenue. They have a fellowship hall, friendship hall there.
Friendship Hall,
Yeah.
Project 90.
Yeah, it's funded now. It's really.
Just as an aside, I work for Habitat for Humanity, and we use your members at Project 90 to come out and help us build our homes.
Yeah.
Some of the best guys we've ever seen, and gals, they come out of there.
And they have a dormitory on 9th Avenue near El Camino, and you'll see these young men walking. If you're going down El Camino in the morning, they're going taking their walk. So Project 90 is really a great organization now. But they won't forget how it was really formed. Johnny come late is taking the benefit of it. But this man from Shoreview, who was the one who really had the idea.
Incidentally, they have to move, they'll soon be gone because that
Yeah, I know
farm is
that.
redeveloped, yeah.
That's correct.
They have to find a new home,
Yes.
so I don't know if they've been successful yet finding a new
So,
home.
Ken said real estate. So that's being developed for apartment buildings?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the owner of the bank on the corner owns all that, most of that lot there.
Yeah, one of my patients told me that they would have to move.
And Jerry, you have a
Hard
question?
to find.
Just an observation, Project 90 also deals with all kinds of addictions, many kinds of drug addictions as well. I've seen firsthand the successful project they have and how they help people rehabilitate themselves.
Well, in those days, alcohol was a criminal. Now, cocaine, all these other things, now, amphetamine. But at that time, they specialized in alcoholism.
Okay.
We've never heard of these other things.
Crystal meth has ruined a lot of lives, and they see a lot of those people there.
Yeah. But that's how Project 90 really was formed, by the fellow in Shoreview.
So when was that? When did that start?
That's in the 50s, between 50 1952 and 55.
Wow.
But there's a fellow, the others take credit for it, but they really not the founders of it.
And what major changes have you seen in San Mateo during your tenure here?
Well, the population has become more minority oriented. A lot of immigrants from all over the world. Sometimes I feel like the Statue of Liberty is practicing now, because I have so many people from all over the world coming.
Really?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Questions?
What was your role in Planned Parenthood?
I was on the board of Planned Parenthood at the time, the founding board.
And why was it started?
Planned Parenthood, well, to fight unwanted pregnancies.
Okay.
That's to cut it to the nitty-gritty.
That's what it is.
That's right.
Okay. And so did Planned Parenthood were the abortions done in the hospital at that point?
Yes, they were legal. They were legal at that time.
Okay.
Back from the age.
I was in Illinois where it took a long time for them to realize that option was available.
Yeah. When we first started, abortions were done at all of the hospitals, but as you know now, they're really not done there anymore. They're done in the offices. You were telling me at one point about the restaurants, the famous barbecue restaurant in San Mateo. You were saying that somebody had a really famous restaurant in San Mateo until the war or something like that. No, that was Les Williams' father, who had Noah's Ark. That was a famous restaurant. That was before my time.
Oh, okay.
I want to tell you,
There was an arc.
Before your time.
You're probably thinking of that great barbecue place on Amplet, but maybe around Poplar on Amplet, was a great barbecue
Yes,
place
yes.
owned by a black family.
yes,
It might still be around.
no, I don't think so.
Okay, change hands, okay.
Yes.
Dr. Hutchinson, excuse my naive question. I'm an immigrant myself, so I do not know so much about rodeo. Could you give me an idea of what happened? I mean, I know people ride horses there, and they have to stay on, I think, and then sometimes they fall off. But that's all I know about rodeo. So, if you don't mind, could you give me some idea of what's the good stuff that happens, what's the bad stuff that happens?
Well, actually, the rodeo, it was mostly steer riders, so these guys would get, bull riding, and the bulls were like the length of this room. And this was when I was a little kid, and these guys would get bucked off in like a few seconds, and bones was just sticking out everywhere, and I was like, oh my God, it was.
They hang on to a rope with one hand.
Right.
And have to have the other hand in the air. And this bull is mad because of the rope around it. And he's trying to buck him off.
Right.
And these guys are hanging on, showing how powerful they are.
Right, they moved the bulls down this little corridor, so they're just wedged in, and then the guy climbs on and goes, and you open the door, and then, and
So doctor, you were the emergency doctor that you were
Yes.
assigned to that, when they had that? And so you were there as a triage doctor?
Yes.
Right.
And then they moved him to the hospital if,
Right, but they was coming down by stretcher, every 5 seconds. I mean, it was like brutal.
That's insane. Everybody gets hurt, right?
Everybody, I mean, if you didn't get hurt, you won the rodeo. But the next week you got hurt. I mean, people, I couldn't believe, it was worse than any ski resort I've ever seen, I mean.
I think I should tell you
When they
something
have the barrel
about
racing the horses.
what happened when I bought the building. When I bought the building on San Mateo Drive, it became headlines at the San Mateo Times. Black MD buys Kehoe property. And so there was we were living in a little apartment on San Mateo Drive and on West Santa Ynez and Claremont. And I received mail, and they mentioned in this article that I was on the staff at Mills Hospital. And so my wife said, "You have some mail here." I said, "Who in the hell would be writing me in this one-horse town?" So anyway, they sent this little letter, small size envelope to Mills Hospital, and they forwarded it to me at on East St. Inez. So the letter, I told my wife, I said, "Oh, Evelyn, open the letter." So the letter said that you are a victim of prejudice, because when she read this sign, Black Empty, she says, "And I will help you all I can if you tell me what are you going to do with the money I will give you." So I told my wife, I said, "That's some cruel letter. Somebody's trying to make an ass out of me." So anyway, she said, my wife said, "I'm going to answer it."
Right, smart wife.
Yeah, so Evelyn answered the letter and told her that we were going to renovate the place, and we were going to have the office on the first floor, and we were going to live upstairs. And so she mailed a letter to the lady, and the lady called and said, come up to my place and get a check. So she lived her name was Leo LeBear, and she lived in a big mansion in Hillsborough. At that time in Hillsborough were nothing but big homes, something like our William Randolph Hearst and people like that. So anyway, I went there and I rang the doorbell, and I saw this figure run down the hall. And I said, what's going on? So anyway, then she came to the door, and this little lady, kindly lady, said, "Come in, doctor." And she took me into this huge room in the library, and there was a photograph of a picture of her husband's lodges at entrance there in the library, and she set me down, and she wrote this check out for $5,000 at that time.
Wow.
And she says, "Shall we toast this ceremony with a drink?" Oh, I said no. I ran out. I felt like Cinderella. As well as I loved to imbibe in those days, I ran out of there.
This was about 1955 or something?
No, this was in 1952.
Wow.
9,052.
Can you imagine? Yes.
You never met the woman before that? She
Never.
said, "Come by and
She just
get a
said
check."
that, yeah. And so anyway, it was Leo LeBear, and we became great friends, and she became the godmother of my youngest child, Henry. And she told me that she was a Brandeis on one. She was a Brandeis on one of her connections, family connections, and the other was anyway, I forget the name now. But anyway, she said that she was Jewish, and she had a club foot. That's what I saw her running to hide the brace when I saw this figure. Yeah, she says that because she was Jewish, she couldn't have a debut. So her father sent her to England to be presented in the court of St. James. That shows the type of money they had. And so she became a good friend of ours, and she would take us to the opera, and we'd to the opera house and so forth. Leo LeBear, she was a wonderful woman. But can you imagine, in those days you write you out a check for $5,000, and she didn't even know who you were.
Wow.
Yeah, so
It was. It was.
I said I ran out of that place so rapidly. And then I took the check to Mr. McGuigan at the Bank of America, and I presented him, I wanted to open an account. And then he says, then I saw him look at the check, and then he said, "Oh, I have to answer, I have a call." And years later, I thought, well, the phone didn't ring. So he went back to his private office and was calling to find out whether the check was good. So anyway, he became old, and he was in a nursing home, and I went to visit him one day. He said, "Dr. Hutchinson, I have a confession to make. The day that you came in with that check, I didn't have a telephone call to take." I said, "Well, I noticed the phone didn't ring." And he said, "I went back and called to find out what's this check good." So he said, Mrs. Bear's secretary answered the phone and said, "Lucky you didn't get Mrs. Bear, because no one questions her signature because she wrote like this. And he said, you would have been fired, she would have had you fired. And then the state would have it. We have a place in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, and we went to church down there one Sunday. After church, they have a sort of a get-together of the people who attend. And we sat at the table with a couple from New York. And she said that...
She's a great-granddaughter.
My wife said, where are you from? She says, well, I'm from New York, but my daughter lives in San Jose. And she says, and his father is a doctor in San Jose. I said, is his name Dr. Bear? She said, yes, how would you think? I said, I don't know, I just pulled it out of the hat. But anyway, that was Leola's son. He was a doctor in San Jose. He grew up to become a doctor. And she says, my daughter is married to his son. And she says, but you know the strange thing about it, he's never worked. I said, well, I tell you, if he's a bear, he doesn't have to work. So the world is very small. Here we go to Mexico and sit at the table with somebody. So Leo has watched over us through the years.
Wow, wonderful.
So I had to add that by my fairy godmother. That's what we called her.
Wow.
We have 1 minute. Is there anything else you would like to say?
May I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
You have to talk about your walking, when you could run across the 101.
Yeah.
Remember? You could walk everywhere, but you're walking. And he's still walking.
I have a walking
Walkathon.
walkathon.
Been doing for like many years. He used to, every doctor in San Mateo smoked. You know, they would walk through Will's hospital like this. Hey, you're doing pretty good, you know. And so, you know, then they said, that smoking's bad. So then they all stopped. And then my dad started walking, I guess, to, you know, get
I
to
stopped
smoke.
smoking. I took hypnosis and I stopped smoking.
Right. My mom, they had to do everything. My mom's like, he's like, maybe you should start smoking again, honey.
And then the time you were picked up in Hillsborough for walking.
Yes, well,
Oh, yeah.
I was walking in Hillsborough one day, and
In the
I
police.
saw-
Yeah.
and right near my neighborhood, and this officer came and said, what's your name? Well, I figured, well, I didn't have to give him my name.
Right.
So I kept walking. So, you know, then he kept following me, and then I said, well, you know, I think House Buell had done a story on Hillsborough, and they said, you've never seen anybody on the streets. They're too old to come outside, or either they're too poor. They don't have clothes on. That's what House Buell said about Hillsborough. So I thought of that article, and I said, you know, this man can kill me, and no one will ever know. So then, when he came, drove up near me again, he jumped out of the car and he said, what's your name? And I extended my hand to him. I said, I'm Dr. Hutchinson. I don't know you either. So anyway, he yanked me, threw me across the car and had me. Really? So, yes. And the dog was in the car.
Whoa.
So then he said, I want to call backup calls. And he called down to a police station in Hillsborough, in El Camino. And the cop came, another policeman came. He said, oh my God, this is Dr. Hutchinson.
Right. Oh yeah, they were very apologetic.
And then he said, well, I'll drive you home. I said, no, I can continue to walk.
Right, I mean,
So I filed a lawsuit against him, and I won anyway.
Of course.
Yeah.
Nice.
and then,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.